There are moments in a man's life that he'll remember forever. His first big promotion, proposing the love of his life, the birth of his first child. But none of those moments compare to the pure joy of beating your idiot friends in fantasy football and taking home your home league's fantasy championship. And in my opinion, it's hard to do that without hitting on a league-winning running back. So on today's episode of the Regression to the Mean podcast, we have 3 league-winning running back targets that you should prioritize in drafts. I'm your host, Shaun, and I am joined by my co-hosts, good friends, and fellow knowers of ball, Aidan and Keegan. Aidan, how are we doing today, man?
I'm doing great. Great to talk through our tiers on our previous episode. If you've not watched it, really good banter on that one. Lot of different opinions, which is good. So no, it is definitely redraft season. It feels like we are kind of full speed ahead towards what we've been waiting months for. So doing great, Shaun.
Keegan?
Honestly, this is the first year in a long time. I'm really excited about the running back position. It's a weird feeling. Shaun was asking us to go through, pick out targets, and we're going to cover a fades episode after this. But I was like, fuck, I kind of like the running backs this year. ADPs have got shoved down in redraft too, just like over the years of people being horny for wide receivers. So it's a better time than ever to talk about running backs.
It's really an eloquent way of putting it. It's bonk worthy. It's bonk worthy with the receivers, no lie. Because I was talking to myself into Joe Mixon. I was like, when would this have ever happened? But I'm like, this is really not a bad spot to draft Joe Mixon. Before we jump into our RB targets, 2 things. One, if you are new to the Regression to the Mean podcast and you love fantasy football, make sure you like this video, hit that subscribe button, and turn on the notifications to make sure you aren't missing any of the content that we are dropping this summer. We're looking to give you an edge in fantasy drafts, so hit that subscribe button. And 2, if you love fantasy football and you want to compete for a chance at $1.5 million, you need to be drafting on Underdog this summer. If you download the app and sign up using promo code RTM, the good people over at Underdog will double your deposit up to $100. Drafting on Underdog is my personal favorite way to get prepped and ready for my home leagues, while also allowing me to compete for a ton of different cash prizes and fun contests. So you got to be drafting on Underdog. It's the best way to get an edge. All right, boys, the format for today's episode is simple. We each have 1 league-winning running back that we are prioritizing in fantasy drafts. And we're going to start things off here with a player that our listeners are probably pretty sick of at this point, because I think I talk about him every single day. And that is none other than the running back for the Miami Dolphins, Jalen Wright. No, it is Devon.
Get this guy out of here.
Yeah, get him out of here.
It is Devon Achane. Devon Achane currently is the RB11. He is going 23rd off the board in most home league ADP. I'm incredibly high on Achane. I think it's pretty simple when you look at his stats from what he did last year. He scored 190 PPR fantasy points in 11 games played. When he was healthy, he was dominant. And I've thrown out a lot of stats over the past couple of months when talking about Achane, but you guys got to hear the stat that I got from Ryan Heath over at Fantasy Points. So he does these interesting articles about stats that matter. I know, Keegan, you're into that and you follow Ryan. And he did some digging. Yeah, he's awesome. Great follow. He did some digging on efficiency for rookie running backs, and he wanted to get a better understanding of the predictiveness for the difference between expected fantasy points per game and points per game. So essentially what your role is and how many points you scored. And he found that there have been 5 rookie running backs drafted in rounds 1 through 3 from 2014 to 2023 who outperformed their weighted opportunity, which again, expected fantasy points per game, by 2.5 fantasy points per game. Each one of those running backs saw a volume increase in their second season. So 4 of those backs, Jonathan Taylor, David Johnson, Ezekiel Elliott, and Alvin Kamara, each averaged 20 fantasy points per game in year 2. And only Todd Gurley failed to reach 20 fantasy points per game, despite an increased volume for his role. Again, those names are JT, David Johnson, Zeke Elliott, Alvin Kamara, and Todd Gurley. Like, why does this matter? Because Devon Achane just posted the single most efficient differential between expected fantasy points per game and his actual fantasy points per game for a rookie of all time. His difference was 6.2 between expected and real life fantasy points. Like, that's absurd. He joins an absurd list of guys that all went crazy in their second year in the NFL, and he's competing for touches with a 32-year-old oft-injured running back and a day 3 rookie. I think he's going to get more run. He has the skill and the legit ability to break fantasy football, and I personally think he could have a year 2 Lamar type leap where Lamar, just set the world on fire when he came into his second year. So I know Achane is someone I talked a ton about. Keegan watched him a ton in college. I just threw a lot of stats. What are your thoughts on Achane? I know that I pushed him way up the board. Home leagues probably won't, but I'm curious to know if it's too rich or am I banking too much on upside here?
I think you've got him a little higher than I'd like. But like it's hard not to be excited about this guy. Like if you watch his highlights from last year and you just look at like, the pure just like fantasy points per game and just like the different numbers where he's just like eye popping in terms of like, the company he's with. It's really hard not to get excited about him, especially when you look at the scheme he's in too. Like you absolutely know that McDaniel's going to scheme him up left and right. These got guys motioning all over the field. Like he's in an amazing spot to absolutely break out. I like him though. I like him. I think his ADP is right around where I'd get him. I know you pushed him up a couple spots in terms of our RB rankings, but yeah, it's hard not to envision what could be with him. Like it's absolutely like top 5, top 3 RB upside. And you're getting him at what, RB 10, RB 11? You said, so pretty exciting.
I will say he's definitely not going to be on the roster that loses your league this year.
Probably
he's
not.
way more likely to be on
Yes,
the
yeah.
roster that wins you your league. Like he
Barring
just has
injury,
so much upside and crazy efficiency, and I think it's that speed too that really gets Devon Achane in these like really favorable spots, because once there's a hole, like he can turn a pretty simple dive rush play into like a 50-yard touchdown. Like he doesn't need much space to get loose, and once he is loose, it's really hard to catch him, which makes it so tantalizing in fantasy football. Like there's very few people in the league that can do what he does in the open field, and it's just somebody you want to draft. It's a risk because his size, and I'm not going to be a BMI bro. Like I've watched Devon Achane play for 4 straight years now, and I know he's not like your typical small guy, but it still matters at the NFL. He could still get banged up, and you have to worry about that. So you have some risk when you take him this high, but it's a risk I think that's worth taking, because if you don't take those kind of risks, you don't win your fantasy football league.
It's just absurd efficiency. I expect that efficiency to come down, but I do expect more volume, and I project that he has an increased workload as a receiver. I've said this several times, but I watched a 30-minute YouTube video that was every single touch and target for Achane last year. I mean, guys, he's unbelievable. Like big guys bounce off of him, the angles that he takes, the speed that he has, what he can do as a route runner. He showed a ton of promise. He left a ton of meat on the bone out there developing as a receiver. So I think he could kind of make that Alvin Kamara type leap where he is a huge receiving option out of the backfield for this team. So I'm in on Achane. I think there is some risk here, but at the end of the day, I think it's, as Keegan put it, I think it's a higher likelihood that you fading Achane or not drafting him hurts you a lot more than just drafting him. Like at the end of the day, I think that he has that kind of upside. So I'm a huge fan of Achane. I'm going to try Achane. I'm going to try and get as much of him as possible. But in some leagues, you're going to have people that are like me who are just Achane pilled, and it might be hard to get him because they're going to willing to take him way ahead of ADP. So it's just something to keep in mind. Like if you want him, and that's why I've moved him so up my ranks, you're just going to have to go get him. It's hashtag get your guy season. So that would be my approach with Achane. Moving on to a year 3 guy, though, that showed a ton of promise, had his role expand dramatically through the back end of last year, and is by far away the unquestioned lead back in one of the best offenses in football. Keegan, tell us why you're in on the RB9 this year, Isiah Pacheco.
Yeah, you said some of it right there, but I think we can start by just talking about how much we're expecting the Chiefs to score points this year. I mean, they're projected to score close to about 27 points per game this year, while also being projected to be in the top 15 to 13 teams of plays per game, which is a good sign. Anytime you hear that, more plays per game means more offensive opportunities to score. There's also just the backfield that you mentioned, like clear starter. They didn't bring in a pass catching back or like a scat back to kind of relieve or be on passing downs. Like, it's really easy to be an Isiah Pacheco no matter the price. Like, I'm not scared of Clyde Edwards-Helaire or anybody else that's going to be there.
Generic Prince.
Generic Prince. Like, I'm just not worried about that. And, Shaun said it too, like, he's built a lot of trust with the Chiefs staff over the past couple years, being in that offense. He still runs like a maniac, but he's constantly improved as a running back every year. And just to get into some metrics, that the one that I thought was just fantastic, but he was ranked 7th in red zone touches last year. And in a Kansas City offense, like, he was 3rd on Kansas City in red zone targets, like, just specifically on Kansas City. Like, he's very active in the red zone. The back end of the year is what we really need to look at with Isiah Pacheco. From weeks 11 all the way to the Super Bowl, like, he's averaging 18.2 expected fantasy points per game and averaged 18.3 fantasy points per game. So a little bit over his expected output. He's also 6th in rush yards during this stretch. He was also 7th in TD rate. He was scoring a touchdown like 4.3% of his rushes, which is a fantastic number for a running back, And then 5th in yards before contact for that stretch. I call it out because the Chiefs O-line was cooking towards the end of last year, and they're projected again to be a top 5 unit. I know Pat Thorman from Establish the Run has them ranked as the 4th best O-line heading into the season. Just some other metrics that matter. 89 plus scrimmage yards in his last 8 of 9 games and 20 plus touches 7 times in week 11 through their Super Bowl run. And in their playoff run alone, he was averaging 16.6 fantasy points per game. 90% inside the 5 touch share, like carry share is crazy. 10% target share. I mean, there's so many statistics that I could go on and on about, but the biggest point here is the Chiefs trust him, and the Chiefs did nothing but get better. They won a Super Bowl and they got better. They got a little bit worse on the defensive side, which actually might be good for their offensive output. Like, they were pretty locked down on defense last year. No L'Jarius Sneed anymore. Offense might be on the field. And they also brought in 2 field stretching wide receivers. That's going to make their passing game more of a threat, which also means they're going to be in the red zone more often. I mean, we're talking about a running back who's going to be on one of the top scoring teams with no competition, and you're drafting him as like RB9, RB10. Really hard to say no to Isiah Pacheco.
Yeah,
Aidan, I know you're in on Pacheco. You just bought him in one of our dynasty leagues. Like, what are your thoughts on Pacheco and redraft?
All 3 formats for me. Like, you don't got to bend my arm. It's such an easy sell. It's like, you're tied to an awesome offense. He's proven it already in year 2. No real competition to touches. Is going to have a 3-down role. Like, I don't know what else you want here. It's like, all green flags here with Isiah Pacheco. Once we wash away the late round pick, that he was in the NFL draft, like, what's not to like here with Isiah Pacheco?
Yeah, so I don't even think about what his rookie draft pick was anymore. Like, other than the fact that he runs a little funny, like, I don't think where he was drafted at all.
Yeah, the Tasmanian Devil's good. No, it's like, I'm fully in on Isiah Pacheco, especially he's RB10, I think it is. That's great value. Like, you're not breaking the bank for this guy. Go hammer some receivers. Maybe you'll get a quarterback or a tight end early, and then you're taking him with your 4th round pick. Maybe late 3rd, depending on like how many teams and whatnot. So
I think
I think
going in. I think Pacheco's the 20th pick, so you're got to get him in the end of the 2nd round on average.
And that's home draft leagues. And honestly, Pacheco's not a player I think that has the same, like, what's the best word you describe him?
Wow. 31 in sleeper. He's the 31 ADP in sleeper right now in PPR.
Yeah, he's not a sexy name either. Like, I have a feeling that he'll fall in home league drafts because he's not Saquon. He's not Derick Henry on the Ravens. He's not one of those like big time names that people think like, oh, I gotta have this guy. Like, he's easily somebody who could fall just right into your lap at the perfect spot in your drafts, and you're gonna walk away so happy. Like, am I saying Isiah Pacheco is going to be the number 1 running back in fantasy? No. Like, I don't know if he offers the Breece Hall or CMC upside, but am I saying he's going to be a top 10 running back? I think that's very in his realm of possibilities, just with how good the offense is going to be. And it's one of the only running backs being drafted in this range that's tied to such a potent offense. Maybe Aidan might have a running back to talk about that is also tied to a potent offense, though.
We just got a text from Aidan being like, "You guys are using ECR, right?" I'm using Fantasy Pros ADP.
Yeah,
I'm looking at different rankings here.
Oh, geez, it's all good. No. He is a 3rd round in sleeper though, but yeah, I mean,
Yeah, let me send you.
Pacheco in the third round is nasty. I think, and Keegan, I don't know if you hit on it, but the inside the 5 percentage in terms of runs within the 5, he had 90% last year.
90%.
10% target share. So he's like getting the goal line carries and he's getting the targets. Like that's all you can ask for. Like that is your baseline to be an RB1. And then he has so much upside because of what he could do in that offense. It's just a high octane offense. Like Pacheco is somebody, if I miss out on Achane, I'm very happy taking Pacheco as my RB1 if I've nabbed 1 or possibly 2 elite wide receivers. Like that is an excellent start, in my opinion, with Pacheco.
Agree with that, man.
So we're gonna end with probably the greatest running back of our generation, I guess, or since I don't know, maybe the last
him or AP
5-6 years, maybe the last 10 years, the 2020s. Still early, but we got to talk about the King. He has now transitioned from the Tennessee Titans over to kind of a dream spot with the Baltimore Ravens. Aidan, tell us why you're in on the King right now at ADP.
Yeah, we are totally switching gears here. We're talking about a guy that has twice as much experience as Pacheco and Achane combined. Going into year 9, but absolutely still getting it done. You just look at what he did last year. It's like there's really no signs. Like look at that year over year. It's pretty much since he took over.
It's so ridiculous.
It's pretty ridiculous. 1,400 total yards, 12 touchdowns in what was an awful offense. Like that was a truly putrid offense that we watched him play in last year. Yeah, just looking at him, man, it's like 1,000 plus, 10 plus TDs. Like he just walks into it every single year. He's not going to be in the same offensive scheme, but I still absolutely love what he has here in Baltimore. It's by far the best team he's ever been on. Just looking at what they did last year on the ground, like this is an absolute dream outcome for him. They're first in rush attempts last year, first in rushing yards last year, and second in rushing TDs. Baltimore absolutely likes to establish the run and pound the rock, which could not be better for Derick Henry. Super excited about that. Look at Gus Edwards. The guy walked into 13 touchdowns. Derick Henry is 10 times the running back that he is. Like it feels like the floor for him is a dozen touchdowns, which at that point,
they don't use Lamar. They don't use Lamar in the red zone.
Yeah, they don't use him in the red zone. So I absolutely love him there. Like you just look at a team kind of looking back to what Keegan said too. Like the Baltimore defense took a little bit of a dip. I don't think they just completely like run over people quite like they did last year, which I think is good. I think like the offense is going to get like more scoring chances. It's not going to be, just slow down the field all game. So love Derick Henry here. Looking at him, he's probably going to be around the end of round 2. So, go and get your wide receiver first. You're probably drafting him if you're in the top end of the draft. So, maybe you go get a Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, and then Derick Henry on the way back. Grab another receiver going back. I think you do way worse.
That sounds pretty good to me.
Not bad.
I like him.
What's so funny about Derick Henry on the Baltimore Ravens is like every year we like fantasize about Baltimore running backs because they do establish the run, and like we clamor at a running back who's on the waivers that's like taking over for whoever's injured. Every time J.K. Dobbins gets injured, just like we have to have
justice.
Dude, it happens. It happens every year because it's such a good run game, and it always has been. But now, like we finally have this like golden ticket running back on the Baltimore Ravens, and it's fucking Derick Henry. I think that's so exciting. And the fact that he's like getting pushed down because of his age is maybe fair, but I think Aidan's right. Like he could probably sleepwalk into a dozen touchdowns this year.
Easily.
None of his metrics were poor in 2023. He was top 10 in rush yards per game, TDs, explosive run rate. He was a top 3 in explosive run rate, which is crazy. Missed tackles forced, percentage of team carries inside the 5. His efficiency numbers were solid in terms of yards per carry and rush yards over expected. And like Aidan called it, like he did this behind a really bad offensive line. They gave up the 9th fewest yards before contact per attempt, and he faced the 2nd highest amount of 8 defenders in the box. Like that is just a nightmare situation for a running back. They're just loading up to stop you with a bad O-line.
It's a dream scenario for Derick Henry.
Yeah, awesome. He still hit home.
It's awesome.
He still hit home. So like, you look at his range of outcomes. It's a little hard with the Sims because he's older, But I think this Mark Henry 2019 season is a really good comp. He was 30.
Mark Henry?
Mark Ingram. Sorry.
Mark Ingram?
Mark Ingram. I think this is a really good comp. I think 16 fantasy points per game would be a great year for Derrick Henry. They're saying his high would be 18. I think he is way over 12. I think 16 is a good spot for him, which would put him firmly in that place where he's drafted. And you can easily roll into that RB8, RB7, and then, in juicy matchups, he could go off. So I think there are some O-line concerns with the Ravens. I don't think they're as stout in the offensive line this year as they have been in years past based off of rankings that we've seen, especially with Brandon Thorne's rankings over Establish the Run. And I don't really want to overthink it, though, because all Derrick Henry has to do is just get into the secondary, and then it's over. Like, that's his whole thing. It's like, it's over. Whenever a safety has to tackle Derrick Henry, it's never been more over. So I think that we're going to get more of those opportunities for King.
Just think about how tired teams are going to be playing the Baltimore Ravens this year. Like, oh, Mark Andrews catch for 11 yards. Like, oh, Zay Flowers run after the catch for 7. Oh, Derrick Henry 4 yards a pop. And they're just going to fucking pound you. Like, oh, wait, Lamar Jackson keeper for 25 yards. Like, it's going to be frustrating. I think Derrick Henry's going to have the weight of the world off his shoulders. Like you said, Shaun, like no more loaded boxes, a better offensive line, weapons around him that can take the tension off of him. Sounds good to me. Fuck, I need to draft Derrick Henry right now.
I will say I do think the Ravens will rotate in other running backs more than we're used to with Henry, but Tajay played a decent amount last year, and Henry still was the PPR RB8. So I think he's going to have a pretty similar role to what he had with Tennessee, which is in a better offense, and we're going to take that. Sure, he's a year older, but he showed no signs of decline last year, really. And then he was the RB4 in 2022. So just the king is the king until otherwise. And it's pretty cool that he's now with Lamar Jackson, one of the best offenses in football. Like, I wouldn't overthink this one because you could mid-curve this. You could mid-curve this to death where you're like, oh,
Shaun, people don't know what mid-curve means. Like, we live in a Twitter silo. You have to explain that. Like, people don't just know what mid-curve means.
It's the IQ bell curve where the dumbest people are on the left and the smartest people are on the right. And the meme is that the dumbest people and the smartest people come to the same conclusion. Where just like any idiot could be like, Derrick Henry's on the Ravens? I got to draft him. And, like the smart person's like, Derrick Henry's on the Ravens. We're going to draft him. And then the person in the middle is like frustrated. He's like crying. And he's like, Derrick Henry is going to be in a timeshare with Justice Hill and he's not going to see as many touches and he's 32 years old. Like, it's just like, you're overthinking it. Like, trust me.
Derrick Henry go burr.
Yeah,
just hit the draft button. Just hit the draft button and
buttons are meant to be clicked, all right? Buttons are meant to be clicked. Draft Derrick Henry. I think all three of these guys are really fun picks, in my opinion, offering various degrees of ceiling, floor. Henry probably feels the safest. Achane probably the riskiest, but definitely has the most upside, in my opinion.
For sure.
Anything to say before we jump, boys?
Those are 3 fun names. I'm going to need at least one of all of them. Yeah, there's really no way around. I'm going to need at least one of all of them. Yeah.
I feel like we might have done a disservice by not, maybe having a later round target, but I really do think getting out of your drafts for the listeners with one of these 3 guys is like a surefire way to set yourself up for success.
We ended up with RB 9, 10, and 11. So to your point, it's like not the earliest, not the latest, but some good ones.
A guy we talked about in our tiers is like a late round flyer. We'll talk more about sleepers, but I think we all agree that Rico Dowdle is a great pick in the back end of drafts. Like, I don't know if he's my priority flag plant per se, but I really like Dowdle as a
we should just do like a sleepers at every position episode and maybe go into some deeper targets. But these are 3 solid flag plants that could definitely help win you a league this year.
And that's the goal. All right, guys. Thank you for joining, and thank you everybody for tuning in. Until next time.